Putin's Mafia State by Leonid Nevzlin is a harrowing exploration of how Vladimir Putin transformed post-Soviet Russia into a regime where the lines between organized crime, government control, and corruption became blurred beyond recognition. The book provides an in-depth analysis of Russia's political and economic degradation, tracing how a once promising democracy devolved into a system dominated by oligarchs, corrupt officials, and a central figure whose ambitions go far beyond mere governance. Let's dive into the narrative, exposing the intricate web that has come to define Putin's mafia state. The story begins by highlighting Russia's transition after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. When Boris Yeltsin became Russia's first president, there was widespread hope that Russia would finally embrace democracy and a market economy. However, that optimism quickly gave way to the rise of the oligarchs, men who became extraordinarily rich by acquiring state assets during the chaotic privatization period. Putin emerged on this scene as a relatively unknown figure, but with his background in the KGB, he was quickly elevated to positions of power. It didn't take long before he started to consolidate control, gradually bringing all aspects of Russian society under his command. To further illustrate Putin's rise to power, it's essential to understand how he ruthlessly used malicious actions and violence to secure his dominance. Early in his political journey, one of the most infamous events was the 1999 Russian apartment bombings. These bombings, which killed hundreds of innocent civilians, were blamed on Chechen terrorists, but many believe Putin and his security apparatus orchestrated them to justify launching a second war in Chechnya. This brutal campaign not only crushed Chechnya's independence movement, but also boosted Putin's popularity, portraying him as a strong leader capable of restoring order amidst chaos. What makes Putin's rise particularly concerning is how he managed to exploit the weaknesses of Russia's nascent democratic institutions. He formed alliances with key oligarchs, gaining their loyalty through a combination of fear and favors. Those who resisted were dealt with harshly, whether through imprisonment or exile. One of the most notorious examples was the fate of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the richest man in Russia and CEO of Yukosoil, who was arrested on charges of fraud and tax evasion. Khodorkovsky's downfall was a signal to the rest of Russia's wealthy elite. Either align with Putin or face the consequences. This chilling message effectively ensured that the oligarchs would become a vital part of the Kremlin's apparatus, reinforcing a culture of corruption and unchecked power. Nevzlin provides a deeply personal perspective on these events. As a former oligarch himself, Nevzlin had front-row seats to Putin's power grab. His own story is one of exile, having fled to Israel after realizing he too could fall victim to the regime's crackdown. Through his insider's view, we gain an understanding of how Putin's government operates like a mafia organization. Loyalty is the most valuable currency, and dissent is met with brutal punishment. The book draws a comparison between the way mafia families control territory and how Putin has exerted control over Russia's resources, institutions, and even its media. Much like a mafia don, Putin operates through a tight network of loyal associates, individuals who owe their wealth and influence to him and in return ensure his political survival. These loyalists, often referred to as siloviki, hold positions of power in key industries and government sectors, much like how a mafia family controls various business operations in a territory. Just as mafia bosses use intimidation and violence to enforce loyalty and eliminate rivals, Putin has employed tactics such as rigged trials, targeted assassinations, and the weaponization of legal systems to maintain dominance. Figures who challenge his authority, whether political opponents, businessmen, or journalists, are either silenced or forced into exile, drawing a direct parallel to the way a mafia leader deals with threats to their reign. This grip over power extends not only to internal affairs, but also to international dealings, where Putin's network operates with the same secrecy and ruthlessness that typifies organized crime syndicates, ensuring his regime's resilience and global influence. Media manipulation becomes a critical part of the narrative. Under Putin, Russian state media was transformed into a propaganda machine, feeding the public a narrative of Russian strength and Western antagonism. Independent journalism was all but eradicated, and those who dared speak out against the Kremlin often met tragic fates. The book recounts chilling examples, such as the assassination of investigative journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who was a vocal critic of Putin's Chechen war policies. The state-controlled media and the silencing of dissent have allowed Putin to maintain a stranglehold on public perception, ensuring that the truth about his regime's corruption rarely surfaces in Russia itself. Putin's mafia state extends far beyond Russia's borders, weaving a complex web of influence that penetrates political, economic, and criminal networks around the world. Nevzlin details how the Kremlin has become adept at exporting its corruption, establishing deep ties with criminal organizations and oligarchs across Europe, Africa, and Latin America. These connections allow Putin to extend his reach beyond traditional diplomatic channels, leveraging illicit businesses such as arms trafficking, money laundering, and cybercrime to secure his geopolitical interests. Russian oligarchs, many of whom owe their wealth to the Kremlin's largesse, act as intermediaries, funding these operations while also laundering Kremlin-affiliated money through foreign markets and offshore accounts. This global network doesn't just serve to enrich Putin's inner circle, it also furthers his political objectives by destabilizing foreign governments and weakening international institutions. For instance, in Italy and France, Russian-backed networks have funded populist and far-right movements, hoping to fracture the European Union from within. One of the most alarming examples of Putin's international influence is Russia's interference in Western democracies, notably during the U.S. presidential elections in 2016 and the Brexit campaign in the UK. Nevzlin shows how Putin's regime has weaponized disinformation and cyber attacks to foster chaos and division abroad. The spread of fake news, hacking into political institutions, and covert support of far-right political figures are all tools used to undermine the political stability of rival nations. These operations, while seemingly targeted at specific elections, reveal a broader strategy aimed at dismantling the post-Cold War liberal order and promoting authoritarian regimes sympathetic to Moscow. Additionally, Putin's support for dictatorial governments across Africa and Latin America, often through the supply of weapons or political backing, cements his role as a key figure in global authoritarianism. By propping up these regimes, Putin not only gains valuable allies but also disrupts efforts to promote democracy and human rights on the global stage. Through these actions, Putin's mafia state presents a direct challenge to the values of democracy, transparency, and rule of law, making it clear that his ambitions are not confined to Russia, but are part of a larger plan to reshape the world in his favor. The book also delves into the use of Russian state assets to prop up dictatorial regimes across the world, as well as how Putin's geopolitical strategy is fueled by corruption. By leveraging Russia's vast natural resources, particularly oil and gas, Putin has strategically forged alliances with authoritarian regimes, offering economic lifelines in exchange for political loyalty and influence. This manipulation of state assets has allowed Russia to project power far beyond its borders, propping up governments that align with Putin's anti-Western agenda. These actions resemble the mafia's approach of offering protection and favors to expand influence, but on a global scale. Additionally, Russian oligarchs, often functioning as extensions of the state, fund and facilitate these operations, blurring the line between legitimate business and corrupt dealings. Putin's geopolitical maneuvers, such as military interventions and election interference, are frequently backed by these corrupt networks, creating an intricate web of influence that reinforces his control while destabilizing international norms and democracy itself. Throughout the narrative, Nevzlin highlights the decay of Russia's democratic institutions. Elections have become meaningless exercises in showmanship, with the results preordained to favor Putin and his allies. Opposition candidates are routinely disqualified, harassed, or outright eliminated. The judiciary, which in a functioning democracy would act as a check on executive power, has been rendered a tool for silencing dissent. The courts are now used to imprison political opponents, as seen in the cases of Alexei Navalny and countless other critics of the regime. Nevzlin paints a bleak picture of a system that has become irredeemably corrupted, where the rule of law is subservient to the whims of those in power. Moreover, civic society, the backbone of any healthy democracy, has been eroded, as non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are branded as foreign agents and shut down under the pretext of protecting national security. Protests are met with brutal force, as seen in the violent crackdowns on peaceful demonstrators. With every passing year, the tentacles of Putin's mafia state reach further into every corner of Russian life, smothering any remnants of democratic freedom and leaving the people trapped in a suffocating autocratic grip. Through these chilling examples, Nevzlin illustrates the total collapse of democratic institutions in Russia, where fear and repression have replaced the hope and promise of a once budding democracy. However, amid this grim landscape, Nevzlin also highlights the resilience of those who continue to resist Putin's mafia-like state. The book profiles numerous courageous activists, journalists, and opposition leaders who have stood up to the regime, often at great personal cost. Figures like Boris Nemtsov, who was assassinated near the Kremlin for his outspoken opposition, and Alexei Navalny, who survived poisoning attempts and remains imprisoned, are portrayed as modern martyrs for Russia's democratic aspirations. These individuals, along with organizations like Memorial and Novaya Gazeta, which document human rights abuses and government corruption, offer a glimmer of hope in a country suffocating under autocratic rule. Their unyielding dedication to exposing the truth, even in the face of violence and repression, mirrors the kind of heroic defiance seen in resistance movements throughout history, reminding us that even in the darkest times there are those willing to fight for justice, integrity, and freedom. In conclusion, Nevzlin's Putin's mafia state is not just an expose of the rampant corruption within Russia. It is a powerful call to action and a beacon of hope for those who still believe in the resilience of democracy. Through detailed accounts, the book serves as both a warning and an encouragement for the world to recognize the fragility of political systems when faced with a determined autocrat. The erosion of democracy in Russia under Putin should remind us all that freedom must be defended vigilantly, for it can easily be lost in the face of corruption and unchecked power. Nevzlin encourages Western democracies to stand firm and not turn a blind eye to the Kremlin's influence, urging collective efforts to expose and counter Putin's mafia state. He leaves readers with a sense of urgency, yet also hope, that by acknowledging the global reach of Putin's corrupt regime and standing united against it, the international community can prevent the further spread of authoritarianism. It is a sobering message, but also an inspiring one. Democracy is never guaranteed, but with vigilance, courage, and a commitment to justice, it can withstand even the most determined threats. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed the audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more book summaries that help you expand your mind. Drop a comment below to let us know which book you'd like us to explore next, and we'll consider it for our upcoming episodes. We look forward to bringing you more valuable content right here on Page by Page. Until next time, keep learning and growing.